Good day, Coptimizers. Got another great show for you today. Today we have retired Special Agent Cory McGookin, who was an instructor for years at the FBI National Academy. We had a really interesting conversation, and I think you'll enjoy it. Some of the things that we touched on are what is the future of policing, and what if we took a different approach from the start? If we had a recruiting strategy that laid out a career path for which new officers could follow, that starts with mapping for them what their career is going to look like, moving away from the shut up and work mindset, do what we tell you, to really engaging with our young officers right from the start. Maybe this isn't a new concept, but we really talked about a lot of good reasons why that's going to be important. Some of the generational differences between Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z, kind of a recurring theme that's popped up on a few of these shows. And it's really great perspective from someone who has had the opportunity to work and train with the best minds from policing, not just from around the US, but from around the world, getting them all in the same room for a period of 10 weeks and getting to pick their brains, to see what the issues are out in the policing world, to learn from each other, and then to take those lessons and leverage them back out into the policing world. Awesome, awesome conversation. I think you'll enjoy it. So let's get after it. Good morning, Coptimizers. Welcome to the most recent episode of the Coptimizer podcast. We got another awesome guest today. I've got Cory McGookin, a retired FBI agent, and I'm just going to let him jump right in and tell you a little bit about himself, and we're going to have a great conversation today. Cory, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
It's going to be fun. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, you got it. I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, and after high school, I joined the Air Force. And I was an airborne Spanish linguist for 10 years, basically the decade of the 1990s. And what I always say, kind of joking, but kind of not joking, I wasn't a very good one. Like the language never came easy to me. So I started really focusing on training to say, hey, maybe I can get really good at training and bring more value than the operations where Spanish abilities was holding me back a little bit. So that did set my life on a certain path because it helped get me into the FBI. I became a special agent right after 9/11, and I served a full career there. Started off in Chicago. That's where I learned to be an agent. That's where I did my real agent work. But eventually made my way to Quantico, where I got back into the training. Knew I just loved that and spent my last 8 years there at the National Academy between teaching and running the program. It was a blast. Loved my career, and I just recently left in January of 22.
Well, that's pretty cool. And when we met and started having these conversations, we didn't know that we had several things in common. I was not a linguist, although I like to tell myself that I'm somewhat fluent in Spanglish. I did take I was close to being a Spanish minor at Purdue, but I'm a Purdue Boilermaker right down the road from South Bend, Indiana.
Yeah.
By the way, how'd the Irish do?
Oh, I was hoping that wouldn't come up. And, it was a tough week, have to say that.
Well, I'm a Boilermaker first, and then probably a Nittany Lion because my dad was a Penn State grad,
Yeah.
and having originally come from the East Coast in the Philadelphia area, I was a Penn Stater, and then growing up Catholic, you're also an Irish fan, whether you know it or not. So
Yeah, right.
big, got some funny stories about that. But in any case, over the years, people always ask me, you're from Indiana. You're a Notre Dame fan? No, I'm actually a Purdue fan. Like
Hmm.
occasionally I'll root for the Irish, definitely
Yeah,
not when they're
right.
playing Purdue, but they've got, they've got a great coach that's got some Boilermaker ties to him, Marcus Freeman.
I,
I think he's a good man. I'm excited to see what he's going to do for the Irish. So
I'm still optimistic.
we'll leave it at that. Moving
Yes.
on.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that we were talking about is you worked up in the Chicago area, and part of my career, I spent some time working with an FBI Safe Streets task force uh, here in the Indiana area, and so some of those times and areas were overlapped. But what were your experiences working with those task forces?
Yeah, that was basically how we got things done. We recognize as the FBI, we do nothing alone. I always said, our advantage, we bring great resources and great significant penalties for those we finally get. So, getting those task forces, teaming up with the locals, and having them say, okay, these are the guys that have been a pain in our necks for a long, long time. And then we bring all those resources and we go get them. And the amazing thing is, these hardcore gang members, when they're looking at federal time and they realize it's 28 to 35 years, they suddenly say, what do I got to tell you to help make this a
Yeah.
little better? Every single one of them. So that was just fantastic. Like, I love that time. That was literally the time of my life. I didn't have a good work home balance because I just loved the job and there was so much to do. And it was great work working with great people.
Yeah, that's the first rule of negotiations, right? Is always negotiate from a position of strength. And
Exactly.
yeah, and
Yeah.
if you don't have the right leverage, sometimes it's hard to negotiate. It's not even a negotiation.
Yeah.
You made a comment there that this is how number one, that you had a lot of fun, and so it,
Hmm.
it created a little imbalance in the work life environment. But
Yeah.
also, it's how you get things done, and it's really about information. The sooner you get good information, the more actionable it becomes, and you get the right information into the hands of the right people, and great things can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell you, no matter what, I did a lot of work in Aurora, Illinois, in the western suburbs. And I tell you, no matter what I needed, I was just amazed at the people who'd been there a long time. Some of them grew up in the area and we're going after a target. And I'm like, I don't know. I think he's supposed to be like with his cousin's sister. And they'd start rapping, okay, his cousins are blah, blah, blah. And they live on Main Street, like the third house. Let's go look to see if we see his car. You're like, holy crap, you guys know your town. Like, and that's the funny thing, right? I'm an
Yeah.
FBI agent. They say, go to Chicago. I can't do the work that you need to do without like those resources. Oh man, it was incredible.
Every department has those officers. They're there. They're like encyclopedic. They
Yeah.
remember every face, every name. And of course, it helps when you grow up in an area like
Hmm.
maybe you've been to high school or you went to college in these areas, so you just have those deep, uh, long rooted connections to the community. But it's invaluable when it comes time to trying to track people down, and especially when you're working cases.
Yeah.
I That we won't talk about that today, but that, from a technology perspective, there's a lot of interesting work that's being done right now about, how do you take technology and pair it with that type of public safety officer, whether it's a local officer, a state officer, federal officer. How do you take that right technology so you can leverage it across uh, communities, and quite frankly leverage it across the country, where it's a that's a, like I said, that's a long conversation, but trying, and again, since we're in the around the time frame of 9/11, such an impactful time, but
Yeah.
one of the big disappointments that the country had was, why weren't we sharing information better? Why didn't we know, or should we have known? And it's easy in hindsight to go back and say woulda, shoulda, could have,
Right.
but you definitely have to learn from it. But the reality is local police departments, there are hundreds of different companies that are providing these CAD and RMS systems that
Mm,
communicate with each other, if not thousands, quite frankly.
right.
And and then everybody's got their own system, so it's not just a matter of, do I want to share information or am I hoarding information? It's really sometimes just about systems that are in place that prevent good communication. But yeah, those task forces, you want to talk about the concept of optimization, but it really can be fantastic when you get those federal resources, you get the bodies, you get the local knowledge, you can create some really synergistic teams that can get some work done.
Yeah, and I have to say, I wasn't experienced enough to be an expert on everything. Well, you would never become an expert on everything. So, my favorite part is that, like I already mentioned, I could turn to people who knew the area and just get information that was incredible. I could turn to the IRS person and say, "That's a confusing world," and he's like, "I got it." ATF guy, DEA guy, like whoever you turn to, they knew their area so well, you didn't have to know their area. And then once you put that all together, yeah, magical things can happen.
So it's understanding what I don't know, and then finding someone that does know it, and then teaming up with them and in a way to get work done. So you know we're going to talk about some of that stuff today from a coaching role. But so you move on from that task force environment, and then you find yourself at the National Academy. And for maybe for listeners that aren't familiar with the National Academy, maybe a quick explanation of what it is and what your mission is.
Yeah, we say it's the kind of premier law enforcement leadership training environment in the world. So we bring in 4 times a year, we bring in 267 law enforcement executives from around the world, like 30 are internationals. There's a number of state and federal, and then lots of local. But 267 come in residential, all in for 10 weeks, and they're taking 6 classes there through the University of Virginia. So the academics are high, mandatory fitness, and they're really kind of having that resurgence at that point in life to really take care of yourself, your body, and find that balance. And I always say the magical thing was really, it was almost like a sabbatical. Can you imagine that very few careers have this? 2/3 through your career, for 10 weeks, you're going to have an all expenses paid environment where all your work duties disappear. You're like, hey, I'm going on a trip. Someone's my acting, and I'm walking away. And obviously, your family doesn't disappear the same, but you're away. You're not there day in and day out, and you just focus on yourself and your profession and thinking new thoughts. And so, really, that's the magic, that 10 weeks of that reprieve to re engage and reinvigorate. And we get all the credit, but that's kind of where the magic is. And then they go out saying, let's go tackle this. Let's go make a difference. Let's change this profession, or let's improve this profession. Let's do things better. And then they hit the ground running, and now you got a network of people you can reach out to. So that's part of the magic of it. Thousands and thousands of graduates who all continue connecting for the right reasons.
The 10 weeks, I don't know if people can really appreciate how powerful of an experience that can be in removing yourself from the work environment, particularly if you're in a operations role with the police department where every day you're in the grind, and it's very difficult. Sometimes the old expression is, when you're down in the weeds, it's hard to see what's coming.
Right.
To be able to get above and to that 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 foot view and take a look around and see what other people are doing, learn what you don't know, teach others what you're doing well. And again, it comes back to that synergy. Same thing in that task force environment. It's a great way to share experiences, share knowledge, but also have a little bit of time to reflect. As I was a chief for the last 10 years of my career, but I had a great discussion with my predecessor. I called him up one day because he still lives in the same community, and about 6 months after he had retired, and said, let's go to lunch. And so we went to lunch and just sat down, and I said, okay, now that you've been gone for 6 months, if you could come back today, what would you do differently? And he really appreciated the question, and he gave me some great insight. But one of the things that he brought up in that conversation, he said, look, I wish that we in law enforcement we had an opportunity, especially for high level administrators. I mean, it'd be valuable for anybody, but to have an opportunity to step away, maybe go on like a work exchange program or go somewhere for 3 months, 6 months, because he said it really took him that amount of time after retiring to really have the ability to reflect on what his path was, what his vision was, what he was working on, maybe some of his own blind spots about what he wasn't seeing. And so I took that to heart, and then you get into the role and then you're right there, and
Yeah.
you don't get a chance to do it because that's not the way that we currently think about, and it would be difficult, I think, in practice to do. A chief, that's a hard thing, especially considering that the average tenure for a chief is 3 years.
Right.
That's most chiefs are appointed to their positions. They're not elected officials, so their tenures sometimes tend to revolve around political cycles.
Right.
Hard to get things done, but yeah, that's great. The other thing real quick too, when you have you brought up that it's on site, so you're housed together, so you're separated from your family. That can create some stressors, especially for people that maybe if they've never been away from home that long, or typically at that point, because generally you're getting people that are in that mid-level command staff position that you're taking out there. In police departments, we're looking to create the future leaders of the agencies when we send them to the National Academy or Northwestern or Southern Police Institute. There's a couple of these other ones, but being on site, being separated gives you that extra time and ability to reflect. But the other thing, the one thing that I think is very unique about the NA is the emphasis that you put on physical fitness and physical well-being. So can you talk about that just a little bit about, why do you think that was important for the National Academy to take that approach?
Yeah. And, we often are trying to find out the root of things, of why we do it. But what's funny is, it's the program's over 85 years old, which is kind of amazing to believe too. 280 something sessions we've done this. But what we came to realize, we don't know the original intent, but that made the whole person just better. And we have such great, we call them health fitness instructors. Those are the people who teach that aspect. And what's really amazing is how far off a lot of officers are from understanding what we've learned from science over the last 20 years. There's still cold stretching and doing things you learned as a kid that now through science we realize is not right. And they really learn how to take care of themselves, how to be, the longevity of your body past your career, to be able to play with your grandkids after you're retired, to be able to be explosive in that moment when you need to, but then just be flexible in moments when it's just regular life. So it's not a focus on, hey, you're going to be running down and tackling bad guys, because most of the people in their positions are in office chairs and such. But keeping your body healthy keeps your brain healthy. And when it comes to decision making and stress tolerance and all those things, you really just can't get away from it. If you really care about leadership, you have to care about those things. And what we really find is a lot of people are smart experienced. I can give you all kinds of accolades of the people we bring in. They're truly incredible, but many of them have not focused on that part of their lives, and they're way behind. So that's where we often see at the National Academy over 10 weeks, like such improvement. People look better, feel better, like they are just different people because of the physical fitness.
Well, I can give you a really good example of this in just within the last few months in one of my roles in working with Axon Coaching and their team. I get the opportunity to go out and speak to different police departments, chiefs and people inside their organizations. But I had a really powerful discussion with an administrator that had just come back from the National Academy. He was literally like 3 days back from the NA, and he number one, he couldn't speak highly enough about his experience, but the one of his biggest takeaways from that was his reflection on his personal health and well-being, the time where he started to focus on nutrition, he started to exercise, and these are all things that people know that they should do.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're busy and when you're in the grind, or like we said, down in the weeds, sometimes it's hard to prioritize that. And he was afforded the opportunity to be able to prioritize on himself for a period of 10 months, lost a significant amount of weight, improved his overall psyche, his approach to work, re-energized him. And so in this time where we're seeing record numbers of people retiring early, we're seeing people leave the profession, we're not bringing in the numbers that we need. There's a lot of pressure on organizations, up and down, right? And we've got this joke in policing, right? Is nobody's got it worse than me. So
Yeah.
yeah, depending on where you are, if you're sitting in
Yeah.
a squad car, you're like, what the heck is the chief doing up there? It's like, doesn't he know what's going on out here? Get out of your,
Yeah.
get out of, come down from the ivory tower here and come work the streets for a day. And then,
Yeah.
when you're sitting in the chief's office and, there's not enough time in the day to get through what you want to get done every single day. It's like, man, just like you said, it was the best time of your life, right? When you're out there working and
Yep.
getting work done. And, um, you know, but they all have their role and they all have their purpose. But the point of me saying that is now we've extended the career of a veteran police officer who has all this years of experience, this knowledge. And now he wants to take that back. He's re-energized, he's reinvigorated, and he wants to take this and give it to his officers and his police department, which in turn brings that to his community. And one of the themes that we've been discussing on this podcast and will continue to focus on is, well, why do we wait until we're near the end of our careers before we make this investment? What would happen if we flip that on its head and started making these investments at a much earlier time? Like, how about like right from the beginning?
Yeah. Yeah. And I tell you what, there's absolutely a connection to coaching here in that what you see at the National Academy that you get 10 weeks, it gives you the momentum to do something with regularity and build some habits. And then when you go back to where you're from, it's easier to keep that and keep those healthy habits and those things. I just think the startup of anything new is difficult. And that's also why I think I found myself being pulled towards coaching upon retirement, because I saw that same thing. Coaching, if it's, for an hour a week, I'm going to carve out and I'm going to focus on me. I'm going to make me better and I'm worth it. And you start putting that focus, and over time, you can start building that momentum and you can see significant changes, whatever it is. It could be your leadership, it could be your promotion, it could be, nutrition or fitness or your family dynamics, whatever it is. You got to put some time towards it, and time's the resource we're lacking.
So in the post-Ferguson days,
Mm-hmm.
the Obama administration committed to improving the police profession. They formed the 21st Century Policing Initiative, and they produced a report that came out as a result of that task force and what they were doing. They identified 6 pillars in areas for improvement. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to go to the White House to have one of those roundtable conversations with chiefs from around the country. It was a fantastic experience. I really appreciated the opportunity, but when I got there, so these are conversations that we were having with our state chiefs association and stuff that we saw locally, and then to recognize, well, it's the same thing that's occurring around the country. Now maybe we have a really good opportunity to leverage this moment to make some long-term changes in our profession and the way that we approach our profession. But that one of those pillars, officer safety and wellness, big emphasis on the emotional well-being of police officers. I come from the CrossFit world and the fitness side of the house and nutrition. So I was always looking for, well, maybe I thought maybe sometimes we lack the emphasis on physical fitness, but that's something that you've always done at the National Academy. And I think having that focus, it really helps people understand that the body is a system, and you need to be firing on all cylinders in order to be at your best. And you can't separate the emotional from the physical, and you can't separate the physical from the emotional, because in the end, they're all going to impact each other. So you really kind of have to do your best at focusing on all those areas.
Yeah, and let me add on that. Well, first I'll say quickly that if, like I said, world-class instructors, like they know their stuff. And if I really had to boil down a lot of what they said that matters the most, I would say it's sleep.
So you speak of sleep.
Yeah.
This you're talking to someone that worked the midnight shift for, I think it was 14 years. I had a couple of years in there where I worked afternoons, where it was, and that doesn't include my time bartending when I was in college, and then prior to that, when I was in the service, I worked a lot of night shifts. So, for me, the work that I'd love to do in policing was at night,
Mm-hmm.
and that it wasn't until after I had gone, I was over 40,
Okay.
and then I went to a shift where I started sleeping at night, and then I went back to nights, and it was like there was something in my body that just there was a switch that went off, and it was like, okay, yeah, I shouldn't be staying up as long as I am and having these 36-hour runs where I'm not sleeping and doing it frequently. And I joke about it now, but you really hit the nail on the head. Sleep is so critical. And some of our guests that we're going to have on the future podcast, we're really going to dive down into sleep and the physiological benefits of sleep and what happens. But sleep is our recovery time, and where I think it's important to touch on, just at least maybe briefly today, just to provide a little context. I think most of our audience understands that policing is a 24-hour business. Yeah, it's not like you get to turn the watch off from midnight to 8 a.m. Those tend to be some of our busier times, depending on where you're working and what you're doing. So with that in mind, you have to be able to manage that time. And so in an environment where, my concern, we're having trouble recruiting people and bringing in, we're also, we're teaching a generation too, or this next generation, that you got to care for yourself. You got to take good care of your body, of your physiology, because that's what's going to make you a good performer when you're at work. That's going to maximize the benefit for you and for us. But we're also going to ask you to do things that run contrary to that. We're going to tell you
Yes.
to stay up all night.
Yeah.
So that is, sometimes it's difficult to reconcile. And it's sometimes I think the general public at large doesn't understand the pressure that can put on individuals, put on their families, when, because the rest of the world does, they're not working nights. There's, outside of policing and nursing and a few other industries, I would say 98% of the world is asleep at night, and there's just a few of us up all night.
Yeah, and I'd have to say, like, it's an overall wellness issue, and sleep's such a large part of it. But what I see happening is a culture change, like you mentioned, and this may be beneficial where the young people coming in are more aware of these things and want these things. And I think we want that for our young officers, for all of our officers. So maybe there's an opportunity here to make that change. Because one thing those health fitness instructors used to say is, and some have been there over 20 years, they say it took a while to change the culture. That the culture used to be, you proved your toughness by pushing yourself. Even though you injured yourself and you want to finish that yellow brick road, you push through because you're tough. And now damage your knee beyond repair where it's affecting the rest of your life. Like, that's the wrong mentality. We want to set you up to be healthy, to take care of your body, not to show your toughness by saying, I don't need all that sleep and I can do this and I can do that. So it really, we've changed it there by far. Like, it's well done by them, but they'll tell stories of how hard it was. And I think that's part of the police profession in general, where there's always been this just push through mentality, which we know sometimes you have to do, but that should be the exception because you should be taking care of yourself for the long run. And to make a quick link back to your the 21st Century Task Force, what I always sum up that sixth pillar was, it says you really need to have good leadership and have people take care of their wellness, because well officers will treat the community in the best way. And that's what we're all seeking.
Yep. And that's, when we're asking our police officers to go out and make life and death decisions, quite frankly. And you can't, on one hand, ask them to go out there and do that perfectly, when on the other hand, you don't provide them the resources to ensure that they're prepared for that moment. I can promise you, we use the the kind of the NFL coaching analogy a lot, or the extremely successful, the Tom Brady's of the world, right? Tom Brady's just a good example of someone who maximized his potential. Maybe didn't have some of the physical gifts that others had, but he had hard work, tenacity, and he also had the access to coaches and resources that allowed him to develop his strengths and quite frankly also improve upon things that his weaknesses to make him better. But if you overtask and underinvest in a police officer, and then they go out and they make a poor decision because they're emotionally dysregulated, not because they choose to be or want to be, it's just because of the environment that they were asking them to to work in, and we expect them to work in, then that's a difficult ask. And then what I think where it gets disappointing inside of the profession, this will lead me to my next question for you, is that when you're on the inside and you see this and you have this fear of making a mistake because I'm wearing a camera, I'm being asked to do things in incredibly difficult circumstances. Oh, and then by the way, I'm working extra shifts because we're short. And it's, we're kind of the system in itself is kind of, it's a pressure pot right now. And, I really think that there's some opportunities here again, when we're educating and raising this next generation of public safety officer to learn what we didn't do well, because I think policing has never been better. It's hard to get people to understand that it's never been better, but that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of room for improvement. And when in one of my roles as a chief, I would every year I would go down to our new chief school in uh, it would be a panel discussion every year. Chiefs are required to go through a 40-hour course where they're educated on state law, things that they, as an administrator, they might not be aware of, things that they just need to know. And uh, in that week, there was a panel discussion where chiefs get the opportunity to ask questions. And um, I started asking a question back, and this was again in the post Ferguson days when we were really feeling a lot of pressure inside of the profession, asking of the chiefs in the room, how many people in there would uh, now, knowing what they know about the profession and where things are going, are still actively encouraging their loved ones, maybe their own children, to pursue a profession in policing. And um, sadly, very few hands go up. And so, which then, begs the question, well, how many of you are actively discouraging your loved ones to go into this profession? And almost all of the hands go up, because the pressure that they're feeling, it's I wouldn't wish this on someone that I loved. I don't want them to experience this. And that's really concerning about the future as well, because we need people of high character, integrity, that understand the value of what public service brings to our country, and to know that maybe some of our best wouldn't want that for their own loved ones. And I'm guilty of it myself at times. It's like, man, there's a lot of things that you can do in this life, but I know you had a story that was pretty similar to that.
Yeah, I would often ask every National Academy class I taught. And if you're talking about average of 30 students, same situation where only a couple hands will go up and say, I'm encouraging loved ones to enter the profession. And similarly, that they're actively discouraging people. Now, what's interesting, they'd often say, this isn't the profession I joined like 23 years ago. And so that just used to turn into a great conversation about policing has changed. And if you signed up for what policing looked like in 1992, and here you are today frustrated, that's understandable. But to be able to look at that with kind of clear eyes of, here's what we're expecting policing to be in 2022, and it's still a worthwhile pursuit. And there are differences, but there's some differences that have made it better. We've talked about maybe we're going to start having where we give them time to look after themselves a little better. Because one thing I guess I'll add on is we used to do millennium panels. We'd collect some young people from the area, and we would let the police in the National Academy classes ask the young people their attitudes and opinions, and why they wouldn't consider, or under what circumstances would they consider coming into law enforcement, and what about your friends and your relatives, and what are young people thinking? And just a lot of great stuff came out of it, where you realized there's a lot of misconceptions from young people of understanding that if they were a little more educated on what it was really like, I think they'd be more open. But they weren't afraid to push back. They weren't afraid to say, hey, I know some cops who, they've been married 4 times, their 2 adult children don't talk to them, and they're alcoholics, right? I don't want your path. And we know that's not everyone's path by far, but they see that as much as we're proud of the profession, and it's such a noble profession, but often when you're like, this is a calling, this is a sacrifice, it's almost sold as, you better be 100% in and willing to give everything, your life, your family, everything, or don't join. So people are like, okay, I won't join then. And I don't think it should be that extreme. I think if we get good young people who care about their communities, they will grow into the role, and they will come to see exactly the nobility of it, and they will rise to it. But we're not outreaching for those people who are a little resistant right now. We're looking for those who see it exactly how we see it, and just waiting for them to sign up and there's not enough of them.
Yeah, I had this conversation with one of the founders of Axon Coaching, Daniel, on our podcast, and he's right in that millennial generation. He made a joke about how old I was. Again, I'm not that old, and I'm young at heart. That's what I tell everybody. And I've been one of those people that's been fighting father time for a long time. My goal is to be a functional 100. That's my life goal. Whether I get there or not, I don't know if it'll ever happen. But the the interesting part of that conversation is here in the millennial and the Gen Z world, they're raised by Gen X,
Yep.
and so all the things that we complain about the next generation are all the things that, on one hand we complain about it, on the other hand we're also telling them not to make the same mistakes that we've made. So you see that in police departments where sometimes your veteran officers will they're snatching up these opportunities to work extra duty details where they're doing side jobs or making money, or if you've got different events that require extra amounts of security, stuff like that. Administrations are looking to fill those positions, generally at overtime positions. And 25 years ago, we used to fight over. I mean, it was like you get in some heated discussions about how those jobs are being divvied up, how people get to them, how do we have equity in that system, and you fast forward to today, and now it's like, wait a minute, we have to raise the minimum dollar amount just to entice people to come in and work this, because they're protecting their time. So again, so one hand, the commanders and the officers are complaining, I can't get people to do the job, and then they'll tell them, in these one-on-one conversations with them, hey, don't let the job eat you up. Make sure you protect yourself, make sure you're doing all the things that we're talking about. So yeah, it's a fascinating cycle. And again, this is I don't want to dwell on this point, but when we talk about defunding the police, I don't think people on the outside who don't understand the profession realize how damaging that can be for communities, because in a time where you're seeing, maybe if it is poor policing because of a lack of training or poor judgment, you look at officers involved in those situations, and from the outside looking in, it's easy to blame the person and say, why would they do that? And I can promise you this, we don't hire people that we think have the propensity to go out and do something awful. And I used to kind of have a saying, and I would say it jokingly and casually, but we don't hire bad police officers. Sometimes we just make them, and we create them by putting them out into this environment where every call they go on is crisis related. They're always managing someone else's problems. And then if we're short staffed or we're not giving them the resources that they need, we're just adding that pressure on top of pressure on top of pressure. And then we're surprised when, maybe they pull a trigger when they shouldn't have, or maybe, it's the difference between, one or two hard strikes to gain compliance to, between 9 and 10. Because that dysregulation is there. The central nervous system is taxed, not because people are mean, angry people. It's just because their physiology is working against them. Where do you think the opportunity is for us in the profession moving forward, in turning the tables on these types of issues?
I think the profession has to make some modifications, and it has been. But I know there's a fear if we modify it too much, it ceases being what it needs to be for community as well. So, how much further can we go? Is that such a great question to think about that? But let me tell you something I think informs this very well. Is what I used to do with my National Academy classes. I'd have a little exercise, So again, where the students are late 40s, early 50s, nice long careers. And I would kind of do the 5 bucket thing where I'd say, okay, You can't do all things at all time. But if you do the 5 buckets, which is a family bucket, kind of a work career bucket, that community, social, spiritual type bucket, a financial one, and then a health one, and say you only have 40 coins to spend. Which buckets are you filling and by how much? And a lot of them would have conversations about they for too long they put too many of those resources into the work and career, and family suffered, health suffered, and some even financial suffered. So then I said, well, after we go through what has it typically been, what if you could go back, what would you do now? And they distributed it more equally, and surprisingly, people were putting in the health and family more than career. And then weeks later, I mentioned we do a millennial panel, and I asked the millennials the same question, and they kind of fill the buckets. And when I compare what the millennials said to the what I wish we had done from the experienced cops, they were pretty much the same. But what I used to say is what's funny is this is the way you say it should be, but when people make these decisions, you're just angry because they won't fill the overtimes, and you're like, they're not doing enough, they're not giving enough. And so that's just really interesting how we do need to fill overtimes. We do need to just sometimes do what we need to do, but we also need to take care of people. And there's no magic answer, but I think discussing this matters. And I think showing young people that this is a career you can come into and you will be taken care of. We won't expect you to give everything. We won't expect you to sacrifice your family over and over and over and end up 3 times divorced and all those things, that we have a better chance. And that's where I think coaching comes in a little bit. Coaching can really give people the time to think and look at their circumstances in a clear way that allows better decisions and better understandings. And that's one of the reasons I really gravitated towards it, because something's got to change. And my thought was maybe coaching can be a part of that change, and we can educate the young people and the more experienced people, and kind of find that balance, because I still don't know where that balance is, but we got to find it.
I had a friend of mine that I met early in my career. Our When our kids were very young, he was an orthopedic surgeon,
Mm-hmm.
and this was in the probably 2004 2000 timeframe. So we're talking 20 years ago. But he talked about this approach from our healthcare system as well, right? We're kind of in the sick care business, not the healthcare business, where we wait till people are broken, and then we bring him in and we fix them. And I think he was way ahead of his time, because he talked about this model for healthcare that's very similar to what we're talking about now in policing and other professions with this coaching model. Is rather than wait until people are broken, what if we can put them on the preventative track, the maintenance track, where we can optimize their daily performance through sound coaching. Things like, we don't want you to be 30 pounds overweight, because that's going to elevate your blood sugar. It's going to get your hormones, hormonal system, out of balance, which is going to create this cascading effect. And we see that clearly in the policing profession. If people come out of the academy, they have to pass a physical fitness standard. They're generally in the best shape of their life. And then within 6 months to a year, they've gained 15, 20, 30 pounds. They're working the night shift. They're trying to balance their family obligations, getting things done during the day and work at night, and still trying to eat well and exercise. And historically, we've not been good at coaching people and preparing them for what the rigors, the real rigors of the job are going to entail. And without going into all the the numbers on, police officers die on average 20 years below the national average. Heart attacks, are, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, in some cases, in upwards of like 80 times that of the general population. And there's a reason for this. There's a reason why we're breaking. There's a reason why we're making poor decisions under stress. And sometimes it's, quite frankly, I think it's almost amazing to think about. We're kind of focusing on the negative in this, but despite all of this, when you talk about the millions of interactions that law enforcement officers have every year, very few of them devolve into the use of force. And in almost, I mean, statistically speaking, we're almost perfect. I mean, we very, very rarely make a bad decision. It's the problem is that the discussion and the national narrative sometimes gets pushed by people that don't understand how good we actually are at this. And so we get, that part gets lost, and then we miss an opportunity, and we miss some of these opportunities to know that, hey, we can leverage what we're doing well to our next generation of police officers and make them even better. So that's why I really appreciate everything that you and your colleagues at the National Academy have done in recognizing the value and the benefit that is going to bring to the profession. And I'm really looking forward. I'm excited to see what is going to come next. And I'm certainly excited about this concept of professional development and mentoring from not just the technical and the tactical expertise that we're generally really good at passing on knowledge, but now also, how do we optimize that individual so they can bring their best self to work every day and for their communities.
Yeah, and I'd have to say, let me reinforce exactly what you said, that so much actually goes right, and we don't talk about it a lot. It's not as newsworthy. But really, I think if for recruiting and retention, if people really understood the opportunity you had to do good for a living, which I think people are seeking, and quite honestly, stats show Gen Z particularly is looking for that. They care about worldly things. They care about their communities. If they understood you can do good for a living every single day, and bring that pride to your profession, it does line up with what they're looking for, quite honestly. So hopefully we're a little more education away from getting them to see that and getting good young men and women to join the profession. And I guess I'll add on that our most precious resource is time. And I think if we look at a lot of the issues with policing, it comes down to time, and we need more resources and more and more and more. And again, I guess that's why the coaching for me is we're going to carve out time for you. Like, you're worth it. And we want you on that, as you mentioned, that preventative path. We're going to give you that time to have those discussions, figure out what you really want, and figuring out the best way to get it. And then check in the following week. Are you on path? Did you get it? If not, let's make a correction. Let's keep it going. Let's build those habits. Let's build those positive movements that help you see where you're going. Because that sometimes you're just living the day to day, not really thinking about the future. And taking that hour a week forces you to think about it. And it can solve so many of these issues that will make things better.
The plan, the concept of begin with the end in mind. So if you're going to reverse engineer, if on day one or when you're thinking about becoming a police officer and entering into this profession, we look to maybe a retiree, somebody that's been through their policing profession. They're still in good health. Yep. They have a great family life. They've got good post law enforcement career, whatever it is that they choose to do. And along the way, they also had tremendous impact in what they did while they were working as a police officer. So we looked at and we say, well, how do I build a career that's going to emulate that? Well, I go to that person and I learn from what they did and why they did it. And I take the best from academia. I take the best from the profession, and I take the best from, what's coming up in research, and I apply it. And I apply that at the beginning of my career, not at the end of my career, because I will tell you this: so often, and there's nothing wrong with this, because people need to find inspiration wherever they can get it, and motivation. Motivation comes from within, but sometimes we see the story of the broken man or woman who reaches this tragedy or this moment of circumstance, and then they turn things around, they reverse it, and now they become an advocate for, hey, I should have done things differently. And we can all learn a lot from them, but we can also learn a lot from the people that had it figured out from the beginning and that are on a path, and because they've had good mentorship and they've had people in their lives that have influenced them in a very positive way, to keep them from ever going off the rails in the first place. Because the problem with that trial and error type of learning method is that sometimes you got to make a mistake to realize that you're on the wrong path, and in policing, that mistake can be a career ender. So and it can get you killed, more importantly, and right. that's what we're trying to avoid. So maybe we take this model of reverse engineer, put it in a package that's easily digestible, that's readily accessible across the country, and using mentors that understand this information and the ability to pass it along in an effective way. And wow, look what the future brings. We take a great profession and make it better. And I think that concept of try to be a little bit better tomorrow than you were today, it really does make me hopeful for the future.
Me too. That focus on yourself is not selfishness. That's kind of the take care of yourself so that you're in the right frame of mind to then do your job well, because society needs you to do your job well.
All right. So we're pushing that hour mark here. So these conversations always go super fast. Wish we had like 5 hours. So a couple things I always like to touch on, lighten it up just a little bit. But what book are you currently reading? What's the last book that you've read? It can be fiction or nonfiction.
So this one is, I guess, nonfiction. It's called Sapiens, and it's supposed to be basically a quick summary of the history of the world.
Harari, yeah.
I'm very fascinated. I'm a leadership nerd, and I'm always getting into psychology and trying to understand the why. And this kind of starts tying in how we evolved to, run in small units and deal with each other and all those things that helps me sort out leadership a little bit.
I think the subtitle of that book is A Brief History of Humankind. Isn't that it? Sapiens?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I listened to that audiobook. It's fantastic. That's one of those books where after you listen to, you have to go back and, you almost have to go back and read it. Yeah.
Yep.
When I'm out for walks with my dog, I listen to a lot of books during that time. So, a lot of books, a lot of podcasts. Yeah. All right. That's a good one. What's the last nonfiction book that you've read? Or I'm sorry, fiction book. Do you read fiction a lot?
Actually, I'd say I'm such a nerd that all mine is on psychology and leadership, and that's what people joke, like, you don't read for pleasure. I was like, that's where I get my pleasure, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Reading those kind of books. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to give you one. Did you ever see the movie? So we're talking cop stuff, right? So Did you ever see the movie Heat?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Everyone has, right? Pacino, De Niro. I mean, one of the greatest scenes in any movie ever, the meeting in the cafe. It's just awesome. And, again, from a fiction perspective, that gun battle scene in downtown LA, wow. That was just like, I think it was one of the most powerful scenes in any policing movie.
Uh,
Very, very, very well done. But Michael Mann, who, who was, he was the director for that movie, a writer for that movie. He also wrote and produced Miami Vice. He actually has his ties to my hometown. But he's paired up now with Meg Gardner, who is a fiction writer, and she writes mystery novels, suspense thrillers, and they paired up and they wrote a book called It's Heat 2. So it's kind of like, right now we're in this prequel evolution where we're seeing what happened before the Game of Thrones,
exactly.
what happened. Yeah, there's
All
several of these shows.
Stuff. Yeah, sure.
All that stuff. So now it's kind of like, well, what happened? What happened before, and then what happened after. It's just kind of this. I'm about 3/4 of the way through the book, and I have really, really enjoyed it. So
yeah, sounds good.
All right, so we've talked about a lot. Is there a question that I've asked, or is there, more importantly, is there a question that I have not asked that I should have?
A question you should have asked that you shouldn't have. I guess it would come down to, I think we talked about a little bit before when we met. I mentioned how grateful I was for the opportunity to be around the National Academy all those years, because I mentioned I'm a nerd. I like learning. I'm fascinated about, our profession. And the fact that I would get to watch all these different cops, the internationals, the East Coast, the West Coast, small town, the large, and really watch them and have conversations with them. And that's my teaching method, right? Throw out a hot topic and step back and let them go at it. And really trying to understand the profession. It is truly fascinating. I wish the people knew what great men and women are involved in policing. And I always said, if the haters could enter these classrooms and hear these discussions, they would become police fans, because there are great people doing this work who care passionately. There's disagreements and there's small differences, but one lesson often learned was we all have the same issues, because they're kind of people issues. So you're like, well, I'm LAPD and I got the same issues as Lafayette PD. Like, yeah, the exact same issues. We're all dealing with this stuff, and we'll probably never solve it, but we got to keep plugging along and trying to make it better. So it's probably my best takeaway from all those years, was being able to see all those people from all those areas and see the similarities.
Well, that's a great way to wrap it up. I appreciate that. I appreciate your willingness to come on the show, share with us a little bit of your story. We're going to have to do this again sometime. You are in such a unique position. You've had this tremendous experience, and not only to impact the police leadership of today, but also the police leadership of tomorrow. And I certainly really appreciate your willingness to stay engaged. And now you're looking, you didn't just retire and, head off to fish or play golf or whatever it is you do. And you're, outside of work, that's, maybe that's something we should have touched on. But the cool thing is that you're continuing to learn, and you're continuing to share what you've learned and applying it to lessons from the past on how to make the future better. So thank you very much for being on the show. And I know people are going to enjoy hearing from you, and great things to come as well.
Thank you for having me. I was proud to be here and share what I can.
Awesome. All right. Have a great one, and we'll talk to you soon. If you're in law enforcement, consider getting a coach, and do so by going to axoncoaching.com. Check us out and contact us today. Until our next episode, I'm 1042.